Kia ora, and welcome to Constellations and All That. I'm your host, Tracy Cartwright, and together we will be exploring the world of family constellations with facilitators and clients from around the world, looking at different perspectives and experiences in the work, having a cup of tea and just chatting with some friends around their experiences in constellations. We'd love for you to join us. I hope that you enjoy this series as much as I have loved making it. Kia ora everyone, and welcome to Constellations and All That. Today, I'm so excited. I have the pleasure of chatting with Jill Purce, who is someone that I have admired from a distance for a very long time, and I'm so excited to have you here on Constellations and All That. Welcome, Jill.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be whizzing round the world to Australia, or at least underneath. We always think of Australia being underneath us.
Well, I'm not in Australia. I'm in New Zealand.
Oh, you're in New Zealand. Well, you're all, yeah, but you're even beyond.
We're often mistaken as a little bit like the States and Canada, right? People
Well, I used to have a New Zealand assistant actually, and my son Merlin was just there, and in fact, I think you saw him.
Yes, I did. It was amazing. It was amazing. So you've had a bit of a connection with New Zealand.
Oh, definitely. I love New Zealand.
Fantastic. Well, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to the audience, to the listeners and the viewers. Just share a little bit about yourself for those who don't already know you.
Well, I've been working with a voice since the early 1970s, and Rupert, my husband, Rupert Sheldrake, always says I should never tell anybody, as it seems to be so long ago, and it is. And I've been doing, I've been doing family constellations for over 25 years, and actually, it's interesting. I was teaching in Munich, in Germany, in the early 1980s. And the woman organizing my workshop said, "Oh, that's so interesting. Do you know the work of Bert Hellinger? Because your work is so similar." And I didn't. And so I started doing the family work quite independently of him, and later became very friendly with him because he used to visit us in London whenever he came to England. And he used my husband, Rupert Sheldrake's theory for the knowing field, his morphic resonance. So I started doing voice workshop as I said very early on, and then I realized that I started working with the ancestors and honoring the ancestors, having people honor their ancestors, and then I found that people's lives changed out of all recognition just by honoring their ancestors. So then I became more specific, and it led me to do work with family and ancestors, but I do it ceremonially and I do it with sound, so I do it very differently.
Fantastic. That's what I think I love about this work too, though. It's not like, do you have to do it this way and that's the only way to do it? Is that, you have that, you're able to bring in your other amazing gifts with it. So, and I had the pleasure of being with you the other weekend with the Mongolian overtone chanting course that you ran online, which was amazing. Yeah, I've been really practicing that and noticing how much freer my body is feeling in that space as well.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, sound is amazing and the voice is astonishing, and it's our main tool, I think. We don't have to carry anything around on a plane and have an extra seat for it. We carry it around all the time, and it's really the key to transformation, being present and everything as soon as we start using it.
What got you interested in sound?
I became interested in how form comes into being because I was very sure that we had absolutely no idea about the coming into being of form. And so I started work with, and in fact I did my thesis at university on the spiral as an image of growth in nature.
The Fibonacci spiral?
That's one of many. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really the journey of the soul, which was my subtitle of the book I later wrote. And then, so I was very interested in how form, one of the ways that form comes into being is when you have a water impulse going forward and then it meets a resistance, and then it turns around into eddies, which then become separate from. And so that's one way that form comes into being. And then I became very interested in the work of people like Hans Jenny, Faraday. Leonardo was the first person to study it. what happens when you vibrate liquids of different viscosities, very fine powders, lycopodium powder, the spore of the club moss, anything with formlessness. When you vibrate it with sound, you immediately see the patterns of it that you see around you in nature. So that's really, I realized sound and resonance was the interface between the one, the spirit, nature, whatever, energy, and the material world.
Yeah, when you put it like that, absolutely. I think sometimes there's two different sides of things, right? We're encouraged, we're told to be quiet, to go within and not make, be in silence, which is good for some things, but in society there's a lot of that going on that isn't always healthy. Crikey, the other one's just gone right out of my head. It'll come back. I had one
Making a lot of noise.
very clear one there that was making some noise, absolutely. How did you come to actually putting that together with constellations, with your sound work? How did that form organically?
Yes, it was very organic. It was, as I mentioned, it was this process of, I started to have people honor their ancestors going back in a very generalized way, because I realized that ancestors have no agency unless the living acknowledge them, and that's really important. And in fact, in the armistice, the commemoration of the war dead in this country, we have we say the societal words are, "We will remember you." So somehow we know that the dead need remembering. And so I started doing ceremonies to honor the ancestors, for people to go back, and very specifically just the main female lines, the main male lines, not all the ones that you've got illustrated behind you, which we have thousands of ancestors, but just the main line, the mother, the mother's mother, the mother's mother's mother, because every woman has had the next one in her belly, which is amazing. And then the same with the male's line, which is a little trickier, because you never quite know what happened on the way. And I just found that it had the most extraordinary effect on people's lives. And so then I started developing it in a way where I was working much more specifically to find out what had been forgotten, what the interruptions were, because I found that any kind of interruption left a kind of unfinished business. So early deaths, suicides, abortions, addictions, emigrations, injustices, anything societally inappropriate, people who'd been forgotten, things that hadn't been said, emigration, so many different things caused a kind of trauma in the field. And that trauma in the field just goes on down through the generations, unless the living at some point interferes and changes it and remembers what's been forgotten, or who's been forgotten, or acknowledges those who've abused you. It's counterintuitive very often, and then everything changes.
Yeah, fantastic. So how do you use it? How do you use the sound? Is there a moment? Is there throughout the whole work?
Well, how I use it is, so for example, it's very ceremonial. I have the person, I choose, if I'm working face to face, and I online I've miniaturized it, so it's very similar. But face to face, I choose the person to work next. And face to face, I work with everybody in turn. But I choose them, so they never know when they're going to work, which I find much more interesting. So I bring them into the center of the group. The group is in a circle surrounding the group. I bring them into the center, and I have a formulaic exchange. I say, "How are you hurting?" And then they will say in one sentence, and it could be anything from something emotional like "nobody loves me," or "my children are, separated from me," or estranged, whatever, or "my elbow hurts," or "I want something. I want a relationship. I want a child." So they can also articulate something that they want. And then I say, "Are you willing to be healed?" And they say yes. And then they go around the group, and I have a kind of ceremonial step, which is a kind of way that the Native Americans invoked their ancestors. They go around, acknowledge the group as the healing vessel. They're all standing when we're chanting. And then when they get back to where they started, the group responds as the healing vessel the other way. And then when they come back to the beginning, they choose people. In that moment, they choose the people to be their family members, their mother, the father, brothers, sisters, just. And then they line them up, and then I have a ceremonial moment when I ask them if it's their family, and then I have what I call the unwinding of family history, when they drag their whole family around. When we're chanting again, we chant a mantra, and then they place them. Oh, well, then they lie down. Sorry, I forgot. They lie down, and I use sage and holy water and rattles, all kinds of things. Then they sit up. And then I have them address each person in turn. So you are my mother and her name, and then only the interruptions. So it's very brief, but they just talk about the interruptions. And these aren't the things they necessarily know about their parents, because with their parents, they know if they were loved or not, or loved or not, or loved more or less than their siblings, and that's usually often it. So I have them say, you emigrated when you were 3, you had a brother who fell down a well, whatever it was. And then you're my father, James, and then the same, and then you're my brother, blah, blah, blah. And so they address each person in turn. Then they set them up. And then I have the person representing themselves. So this is not the way that Hellinger did it. And this is not the way that most people do it. Most people have somebody else to represent them. I like to have the person as themselves. They set them up, and then we start working. And then when we finish working again, I have a whole ceremonial episode, and then we start the chanting again. So the chanting is really between each person as a way of getting the person working and their family, elected family members, into an altered state, or into presence, really. Because I think, the talking is a problem, and talking therapy is a problem because you can only talk about what you know. So I like to use sound to get people into presence so that they're working on another level together.
Wow. That's amazing. That's beautiful. And I was watching your hands when you were doing it, and you were creating spirals as you were sharing and describing that. I don't know if you were aware that's what you were doing, but yeah, wow. I was just visualizing that as you were going through. That sounds amazing, really amazing. And the body being, like when you're chanting and that sound creating light in your body, right? And so
Yes.
then we can expand our light body, our fascia, and which is the connective tissues and all of that. So there's so much.
And
healing.
I have them, there's a moment after they've dragged their family around when they lie down with the family around them. And then I use rattles and sage and holy water. And so they're really, thrown into presence. And then they sit up and talk to each person. So it really is a way of getting people into presence, really, so that they're not in the thinking mind. That's that's always the problem, being in the rational thinking, discursive mind.
Yeah, because then we go into big story too, don't we?
Oh yes, and when people say, "Oh, that reminds me," my heart sinks, because I know they're going to get into story. So yeah, and advice, of course, is absolutely deadly. Yeah.
Fascinating. How do you describe it to people if you're meeting someone for the first time and they say, "So what do you do, Jill?"
Do you know, it's so difficult. I mean, I've done other things which are even harder. I mean, I used to do whole ceremonies with the mandala where the group became the mandala. And that's even harder to describe. It's very hard to describe. I don't usually describe the process. I just say that I'm working with transgenerational traumas and, that people select. It's very interesting, actually, because I think we can tune into whatever we like, which is why I never teach people how to become other people. So if you were chosen, I mean, if I chose you as my mother, you would become my mother, but I wouldn't ever say how you did that. But and the reason how I found this, the first time I witnessed it, was when my younger son, Cosmo, who must have been in his late 20s at the time, was representing. And I worked with 2 brothers very often. And one brother was very, sophisticated. He was doing his PhD on music at Cambridge. His other brother was slightly the kind of the vulnerable one, And they were both in the workshop. And the sophisticated musician one chose Cosmo, my son, to represent his brother who was in the group watching. This was the first time my son had ever done it. And so, first of all, he stood there and then he kind of crumpled, and then I could see that he had become the other person he was supposed to be. And then I could see him, because he's my son, was my son, is my son, saying, "This is ridiculous, I'm Cosmo." So his rational mind kicked in,
Yeah.
and then he slumped again. "This is ridiculous, I'm Cosmo." Ugh. And so he went from his rational mind kicking in, becoming himself again, to becoming the person that he was, supposed representing. And so I saw this process that people go through in the beginning. Is it really me? Am I speaking for myself, or am I becoming that person? I'm sure you must know this. And but I've never seen it so clearly, because he was my son.
Yeah, and you know him so well, so to see the process.
Exactly. But I think, I'm more and more convinced that we are able to tune into anything we want to, just by deciding. And so that's how I think people do tune into the other people and become the other people, because that is, in a way, very mysterious.
Do you know, the work for me really helped me to understand myself, because I was doing all those things before realising I was doing it. And I used to think I was, because there was a story about being crazy in my family, so I was pretty much attuned to that I was crazy on some level, because I'd come up to people, like I'm going to say I'm at a party and there's a conversation happening, and I would feel really differently when I stood with that group of people, and things would come out of me and I'd be like, oh, why did I say that?
Yes.
So the work really has made me understand myself so much better, and a lot kinder to myself, when I realise, okay, now that I understand the process too, and I can say to myself, do I want to share that? Is that appropriate to share? Whereas
Right.
actually prior, it was like the filters weren't there.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I tend not to tune into it in normal sort of everyday life, because I know it can be very confusing for people. But it's always there if I want to. But yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah. I think too, coming from, I had a very dysfunctional, unregulated upbringing. So that was my way of being,
Yes.
which gives me great resources now. So I guess I'm glad that I've been able to find that side of things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. If you want to share, how have you seen this work shift things in your own system, or those around you, that maybe you've done a piece of work and things have moved?
Yes. I mean, I've worked a few times. I worked with first of all, I forget his name, somebody who used to work a lot with Hellinger. Then I worked with Hellinger. Actually, funnily enough, when I worked with Hellinger, I didn't it didn't mean anything to me. I don't know why. Just turning on a light there. It didn't seem to work very well. In fact, the best time it worked really was somebody came to visit Rupert, and it worked with me individually on a tray. And people often ask me, do I work individually? And I usually say no, because I feel that the field, the group is very important. I can work individually with people, but I tend to say no, because the whole point about this work is working in the field. And although I can, and I have, and it's very powerful too. And on this occasion, this was the most powerful, I think. I mean, I've done it several times myself, in lots of different ways, and I mean, they've all been pretty amazing, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say that when I work with people, there's almost always some kind of resolution. And also, I have people articulate if they want something. So I remember I was travelling down from the north of England to London back after a conference. And there was a woman there who worked for the BBC as a filmmaker, and she was with her husband. And they'd been trying for a child for years, and nothing had happened. So I said, well, do my workshop and articulate that that's what you want. I want a child. And she did. And she got pregnant within weeks. Wow. So I do find that it is quite extraordinary as well for people. So there's almost always a kind of resolution, and if somebody articulates that they want something, it almost always happens. And the other thing is, I've recently been asked to apply the method to different issues. So one particular issue is regenerative farming, or agroecology as it's now
Wow.
called. And,
Yeah.
and so I've done that many times, and that's always very interesting. I mean, in a way, there are no resolutions possible with this because there are so many conflicting interests involved, you know. So I have people wear actually tabards, and I have maybe 25 people working, you know, because there are so many issues. So that's a very different process from working with families where, I mean, the only kind of families, I mean, most families are relatively small, 5 or 4 people, sometimes even 2, but Irish Catholic families tend to be sometimes 10 people, of course. But otherwise, it's nothing like, you know, these issues where there are lots of conflicting issues. But it is interesting how the process. So I've done kind of quite sophisticated scientific conferences and had people representing something completely opposite to their own notion, you know. So somebody working with CRISPR or genetic engineering, you know, representing fungi or something. I mean, it's really hilarious.
Yeah. That's what I love about this work, is the adaptability of it as well.
Oh, yes, it's
Yeah.
extraordinary.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Now, you and I were talking just a little bit earlier before we started recording, because you've got a couple of online, you've got an online and an in-person constellation coming up
Yes,
soon. So in
I
January,
have.
I think.
Yeah, in January, I have to check the dates because I don't remember them always. But it's the 16th, 17th, and 18th of January online, so people can join from everywhere. And that's the wonderful thing about working online is, you know, ecologically it's very sound. You don't have to go anywhere. So that's what did I say? January.
January.
January
Yeah.
16th, 17th, and 18th online. And then January, February. Then I got another one in March. I haven't got the dates yet. And then in April, I've got a face-to-face week intensive in London, non-residential, from April the 25th to May the 1st. And I have to say, people do come from all over the world, and it's in a wonderful space. It's close to me, and it's a very, very extraordinary week. And I work with everybody in turn, and it's wonderful.
Fantastic.
So
Well,
those are the two.
I'm going to put those out there. Not, I know I can't come in April because I'm part of a conference that we're doing here. But you never know. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll get to London. I've never been, so
Well, I
and,
try to
and get to
do
see you in person.
yeah, I try to do 2 in-person workshops a year, and I've got another one on the 23rd of November, another week. So that's the only other one. So maybe you can come to that one. And
Wow.
that one we have a requiem mass for the ancestors, and that the priest chants the names of our ancestors that we give them. It's very wonderful.
Wow. Sounds amazing. So for the online one, how will people find you? If they.
Well, the best is to go to my website, which is www.healingvoice, one word, healingvoice.com. That's the best way, healingvoice.com. And if you scroll down on the home page, you can just click a link and book in with, I have an online booking system. It's very, very easy.
Yeah, it
So
is easy. Yeah.
healingvoice.com. Oh, and I also have social media. So Jill Purce and, you know, Facebook and Instagram. So the dates are always there as well.
Great. Okay, so have you seen? As soon as I go to ask that question, I'm told to ask this other question first, because it was a question that popped up earlier. When you're doing your workshops, you mentioned something about everybody gets in. You choose everybody, one to go in the middle. So how
Yes.
many people do you have at a workshop, and how does that work? Because I know it takes time.
Well, when I have a week, I have, it depends really. I never know actually, but about 40 people usually. I mean,
Yeah.
in the beginning when I started after COVID having weeks, there were 50. Now it's about 40 people. Online, it's again, you know, COVID, it was huge, and now it's just about 30 people. But online, I can't work with everybody because I do on the Friday, I do 3 hours where we do two ceremonies for the ancestors to honor, and I explain how I do the work. And then Saturday and Sunday, I have 2 hours, an hour's break, 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so I find that I can't work with everybody online. So what I do is I put the names of the people who want to work in a basket and I choose them. So because I'm used to working with everybody, I don't feel it's my business to choose. So I put it in the hands of some greater force and choose by divination, and it's always fascinating. So I don't work with everybody online, but on the other hand, online it's very intimate, and so because everybody's just there, and so we discuss each one, whereas face to face we don't discuss them so much, we do them. And one of the things that's fascinating is that how the people that you represent often have very similar issues to your own,
Yes.
as I'm sure you know. This is fascinating, and this is something we discuss online, very much.
Yes, that's brilliant. And I guess if you're doing it over a week, you've got that time to do that, because I was like,
Yes.
gosh, you must.
Over a
you
week,
must-
I work with everybody, and I also do several ceremonies for the ancestors. Yeah.
Yes, I understand now. It was like a little part of me was questioning, how did you do that? You must be magic, working in multiple realms at the same time. But you are magic anyway, I know that. And healing voices, healing the voice. So I, when was that? Back in 2018, 2017, I started to notice some things in my own voice, and there was a lot that was repressed, unsaid. And then I realised that I'd created some nodules in my throat, in my thyroid. About 2020, 2021, the medical system said that I had created, that there was cancer in there. So that really took me on a journey, with cacao, which I shared with you earlier, that I make my own cacao. But it also took me on a journey with finding my voice and releasing it. And at the time, I hadn't seen anyone. 2019, I saw Karl-Heinz Rasche, and he was using his voice in a constellation. And that was the first time I'd seen anyone do anything remotely like that. It had been wanting to come through me, and I'd been trying to keep the lid on it, because it was just felt like, no, this is not going to be constellations if I do this. But I have given it free permission. I've given the sound, the energy, the movement free permission to flow through me, because, I was creating this block, it's almost like I put a cap on it. So I'm really grateful that you're doing this work, and it's so important and so potent out there. Yeah, and you're leading the way in it. It's amazing.
I guess. And I love it. I absolutely love the work, and I find it extraordinary, and I seem to be able to do it. That's the other thing. But one of the things that I notice, in order to do it, I have to be absolutely present. I can't have any preconceptions about the outcome. If this, then that. No way. And that is really refreshing, because I want to be in the present anyway, and it forces me to be in the present. So I have to respond instantaneously in the present with no preconceptions. And that's magic, I find that so refreshing and thrilling and exciting and essential.
Yeah. Have you got any examples of something that you could share, obviously without crossing any boundaries of confidentiality or anything like that, but any sort of...
It's difficult, because one of the things that keeps me sane is that I don't remember them. So, for example, if somebody asks me 10 minutes later, about their session, I might look at them very blankly and say, I'm sorry, I don't remember. And I think that's what keeps me sane, because if I was to keep all the stuff that comes up inside, I'd go completely crazy. So it's very difficult for me to think of particular things.
That's okay. It might pop in as we go along.
Yeah, I mean, I have worked with some pretty. I mean, I've worked with all kinds of people, and I've worked with in England. We still have the royal family and all a lot of aristocrats with enormous estates and so on. And I've worked a lot with those, which are interesting. And I always say to them, don't say their just say their names. Without saying who they are, and that's interesting. But I work with all walks of life, from the very, very very simple, apparently simple, but actually sometimes the simplest seeming backgrounds are the most weird and strange. So you never know. I mean, that's what's so exciting. You never know what's going to come up. From the weirdest and strangest and unexpected from you know all through. So yeah. And so one of the things that I have found is that very often people, coming back to your question, I suppose, descendants often suffer in the way related to if somebody has created a dynasty, let's say, and
Yeah.
become quite wealthy, and this is just very occasionally, then very often the descendants will suffer in the way that the people who were exploited, often they have to be, and people are very often exploited, were exploited at the beginning. So, for example, families who are purveyors of alcohol in some way or other, for example, often the descendants will suffer from some kind of addiction, for example, or families that made creating, big buildings or railways, their descendants may suffer in a similar way. So often there's a connection between how people suffer and the way that the original fortune, if it was a fortune, were made. And often people also fulfill the unfulfilled ambitions of their parents. So often, people want to do things, want to go to university, but there's no money, or there's a war on, or so they can't. So sometimes their descendants will do what they never did, and sometimes their descendants will do things which have no relation to what they were doing before. Suddenly, I mean, this happened to me. Suddenly, I started doing things which had no relation to what went before, but it was like I was living the unfulfilled ambitions of my mother, for example. I was living out her kind of crazy dream. So that's another thing that I find very fascinating.
Sorry, you stepped into that, or you had been living it, and then
No,
you
no, I
started.
stepped into it suddenly.
Oh, wow.
Became, it
Yeah.
became part of my life.
Yeah.
So, my mother was a musician, for example, and she was taught by she was a pianist, and she was taught by Alfred Cortot, who was a very famous pianist. And she had this sort of fantasy about falling in love with a European musician, and that happened to me. I met Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who was a very famous German composer, and went to live with him for 4 years. And that was like out of the blue. It was something quite extraordinary. So in a sense, I feel that, and that changed everything for me, and has been a very important part of my life. But I feel that somehow it was related to her. So these are just themes which I find happen in the work, which are very interesting.
Yeah. You make me think about my mum, and yeah, I think there's part of me that's really stepped into this work because I know that she, well, it wasn't. It was. I think it was more of a. There was potential that she wouldn't tap into. She chose not to. She chose. She was always say I would. She wouldn't use her gifts and stuff. It was very much in the family, and no, she was not going to touch them. So, but
Yeah, so you'd have to,
and
yeah,
probably for both sides of the family actually, because on my dad's side, the Irish gypsy running through there, and very in tune, and they never called it that. It was just like, oh no. So yeah, maybe a bit for both sides. Yeah. Yeah. Can I ask, what is your lineage like? What is your ancestry? Is it English?
oh, that's English. My father was Irish and was pretty crazy. He was from the north, actually, so he was a Presbyterian Irish from the north. And my mother was English, Danish, German. She was sort of a mix, a European mix, really. But forever in London and living in London, generations back.
Yeah.
And yeah, so British, yeah, but yeah, with these other elements.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I, for those who aren't able to view Jill online and you're listening, she has a beautiful backdrop behind her with her Tibetan, and this is very strong part of your what would you call it? Your beliefs, your lineage, your.
Well, I've studied meditation and practices almost all my life, actually, and I've dabbled in various ones. And then I finally met a Tibetan Lama in the 70s, and I followed him for a very long time because I found he'd lived in the West, so he understood. I mean, Tibetan Buddhism can seem really strange to a Westerner. It's very baroque and peculiar, but he had a way of, he'd been teaching in Italy for many years as a professor, and he understood the Western mind. And so finally, after having studied in different traditions, I found that what he said really made sense. And so I spent many years studying with him. So that's why you see all these strange things behind me. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. It's great.
And this is a statue of Kuan Yin, actually, who's this wonderful. She's not Tibetan. A feminine aspect of the divine. She's similar to Tara, so she's very similar to the Tibetan, but she's actually not. She occurs everywhere in the Far East. Canon cameras are named after her. Canon, Kuan Yin, Kuan Yin. She has lots of names, and she's the feminine aspect of the divine. Yeah, and so I found her she's played an interesting role in my life.
Well, you carry that very feminine energy too. It radiates through you, so you can see that connection with Kuan Yin.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting, I was asked to present on a panel at a conference on the feminine recently, and I have to say that I've never felt the need, to espouse the feminine cause, but all these things have happened to me which have meant that that the feminine divine has come through me, but it's never been something that I felt I needed to chase after, or I never felt inferior through being a woman, for example. And my mother too, and my grandmother, they've always done what they needed to do, whether they were a woman or not. But at the same time, I have felt very strongly this as you say, this feminine force coming through me, without a doubt. Yeah.
Well, it's very evident, very evident. And I think too, using the voice, and it's another reflection of, and a lot of us know this, that the throat and the yoni, the uterus, and all of the female treasures are mirrors of each other, aren't they?
Yes, they're very connected. Yeah. I like the word treasures. It's very good.
That word just popped in, so that was like, that felt really appropriate, actually.
Yeah, it's a wonderful word.
Yeah. What else do I want to ask? I think my friend Josie asked me to ask you a question, so I'll just go into that. What influence might Bert have had on your work, and with Rupert and what he does as well? So there's two questions.
Yes. Well, I mean, Rupert and my work are very related. There's no question. He's got a lot from me and I've got a lot from him. And before I met him, we met in 1982. We're just about to celebrate on Sunday our 40th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
And our sons are coming up. And so we've both influenced each other very strongly, I think. And before I met him, I worked with a lot of scientists. And then when we got together, I realized I no longer needed to, because I was married to one. And Bert's work, well, I came to this work before I met Bert and before I encountered his work. And actually in the 90s, he asked me if I would present at a conference of his in Wiesloch in Germany, present my work, which I did. I mean, that was one of the first, I think I'd obviously just met him beforehand, but he asked me in the 1990s if I would present my ideas at his conference. So I did. But I think his work has influenced me a lot. But I do it very differently, as I mentioned, ceremonially, and I have the person as themselves. And so I do it in a very different way. But at the same time, I don't know how he's influenced me, but he definitely has.
So you spent a bit of time with him?
Oh yes, I knew him very well. Yeah. I mean, I knew him more as a friend, because he used to come and have dinner with us whenever he was here, and so I knew him very well. And I worked with him once. He worked with my family once, but actually, as I mentioned, it wasn't brilliant. It didn't sort of resonate so strongly with me when he did work with me. But But seeing him work with other people, and I've certainly seen him work with other people, has been very interesting.
And I think he changed a lot over the years from when you
Yes,
see the early work, right? And then later, towards the end of his life, he got much more into the spirit mind and the understanding in a different way. Because I think at the beginning, there's a lot more the psychology side of it. And then this is my interpretation of it, that at the beginning there was that psychology side, and then it flowed more into the spirit and the energy and the healing.
yes. Well, the origins of it are quite interesting because it comes down through the Gestalt tradition. People like Virginia Satir, who I worked with in the very early 80s, briefly. So it's very much a Gestalt movement, but at the same time, he was a Catholic priest. People have made a lot about his working with the Zulus. I don't think that's very important, actually. I mean, I think, traditional cultures honor the ancestors very strongly, and I think in that sense it plays a part. But I don't think much other than that, really. But I think the main roots of the tradition come down through the Gestalt tradition, through the Gestalt lineage, in a way. But his work as a Catholic priest and working with the Zulu, I think obviously affected him very strongly. And as you say, I think it got more and more spiritual and less psychological as he went on. Yeah. And now it's been taken over, really. In the time that I knew him, he divorced his wife and married again, and the person he married again has slightly taken it over and sort of hallmarked it, rather. I mean, the nice thing about Bert was that he left it open for everybody to make of it what they wanted and do their own version, whereas his second wife, which he really happened in his 90s, has tried to make it her own, which is I don't think it is a good thing. Yeah.
Okay, I haven't really delved into that side of
No, I mean that's more European. You wouldn't.
Yeah, and there's I follow the pull. And I haven't had a pull to go there, so maybe one day, who knows, to have a little look and explore that, what's going on there.
Yes.
But I have recently been to Mexico, and so there was a lot of people over there because it's quite influential. I think the work that was happening later in life was coming through South America a lot. Yeah.
I think it's very big in South America, actually. And I think it's used in the judicial system as well there in some countries, maybe in Brazil. Yeah. So I think that's and Brazil has a history of, whereas many people bring different traditions together and you feel it's a kind of salad, whereas in Brazil, different traditions come together, but somehow it works, they're very syncretic. But what comes together is very powerful very often. I've spent a bit of time in Brazil and taught there, and so it's interesting that they've taken it on board in the way they have.
Yeah, and my awareness too is that they have it in the medical system in some cases where there is situations where they just can't quite pinpoint, like they've tried all different things and it just keeps coming back to reset to the original issue.
Yes.
So that's great. Gosh, wouldn't it be, imagine the world being able to do that, look at it from such a different lens, which is really
Rupert's,
original.
And my husband's theory has been really adopted in a sense. His morphic fields and the idea of the field and so on has been adopted by most people who work in this, because everybody tries to find a scientific route for it. And I mean, there's lots of very interesting examples of it coming down through societies, they found that descendants of people in racial traumas like the hunger winter in Holland in the war, the 19th century famine in Sweden, the Irish famine, the Holocaust, and so on, and all these racial traumas, they found that subsequent generations have not only emotional changes and problems, but also physical and chemical changes, which is very interesting indeed. And also they've now found that nematode worms, so scientists use fruit flies or nematode worms in their experiments because they have a very short generation time, so you can see a lot of generations very quickly. and they found that nematode worms, the inheritance of acquired characters, which was when I did a research fellowship with the man who, one of the three who got the Nobel Prize for DNA, structure of DNA. And when you talked about the inheritance of acquired characters, then, they would pale and say it was all in the DNA. And now everything's changed. It's all epigenetic. It's all the inheritance of acquired characters again, characteristics, which people like Darwin anyway assumed was the case. So that's changed a lot. And they found with nematode worms that things that have been inherited can go on for 50 generations. So there's a lot of very interesting work happening in the scientific world around epigenetics. And epigenetics, which is trying to show the effect of how things acquired in lifetime get passed on, which is what our work is about. They try and pin it down materialistically, if you like, in the material. They want to know what's changed, in chemically and materially, whereas my husband thinks it's more in the field, which I'm sure is right. And it's what genes are turned on or off, and how they're turned on and off, and so on. So the establishment is trying to find a physical cause, whereas my husband, who's an extraordinary scientist, feels there's a kind of field or resonance which is going on. I'm sure that's much more what's happening, but we have to wait until that can be proved. But we know. We know.
Yeah.
We see it
Well,
working.
it's that knowing, isn't it? It's that knowing, and it's interesting because as I was growing up, I used to say, "But why? How does that happen? But why?" And now I'm like, "But I know it. I know that it's there.
Yes.
I don't have to question why."
No, why is no good. Useless question. There is no why. When if people talk during a session and say, "Why do you always do this?" I say, "No whys." No whys. There are no. You're just working with what is. There is no whys are irrelevant, really.
Fascinating. I'm just seeing what else wants to come through. That's what I love about this conversation as well. It's like, what's next? Because we could talk for ages about. You said earlier too, when you are talking with people, you ask them, "How are you hurting?" I love that. I love that question. Like, it's really getting to the point, isn't it? How are you
Yes,
hurting?
exactly. Because it's about what's affecting our lives at the moment, and then seeing how what is manifesting for us at the moment in a way that hurts is related to things that were societally inappropriate, were forgotten about, or caused by injustices going back, or whatever it was. And seeing the things that were never spoken about, and people who were forgotten, and when all that's brought in and people are honoured and remembered, and then everything changes. The hurt disappears.
Beautiful. Yeah. It's given it that place, isn't it? In a reverence type of way. That's a place to be seen. Yeah. Do you have any questions for me?
Not really. No.
So you talked about Cosmo coming in and doing a constellation. Has Merlin been part of your
Yes,
workshops
I
as well?
mean, I haven't worked with them because I feel, being my family,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
that it's not appropriate for me to work with them. But they've both represented, and so has Rupert actually. And Rupert was very scared of representing. He feels that he doesn't tune in very easily. But actually, he was wonderful and very funny. And for me, humor is a big part of it. It has to be
Same.
fun.
It
Yeah.
does, because it can be quite heavy and big work too sometimes, right? So the humour keeps that movement
So important.
balance. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so both boys, Merlin and Cosmo and Rupert, have both represented. It was very funny because Rupert tends to fall asleep when he's not actually working. So Merlin plied him with guaraná, this Brazilian plant. So Rupert was sitting there wide awake. It was very funny.
What's
Yeah,
the
they were
plant
great.
called? Sorry, I
Oh, it's
missed
called
that.
guaraná. I'm not sure. It's. I suppose it's got caffeine in it. I'm not sure.
Oh, guarana. We would call it guarana
Ah,
in New
yes.
Zealand. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's very stimulating. I have a story around that. We won't go there. It wasn't very pleasant, and it was a little bit self-inflicted, so
Okay.
involving alcohol and guarana. What else do we want to ask, Field? Where do you see yourself going, or do you see yourself going in the future? Like, are you just letting this evolve? Or
Yeah,
do you
I'm going on with this work. I mean, at the moment I'm every month I do something online. So I alternate between a voice workshop and a family constellation, and then twice a year I'm doing this face to face. Before COVID, I used to work only face to face, and I used to do lots of residential things, but now I whether people want a bath or a shower or to share, or I can't be bothered with that anymore. So now I do 2 weeks a year of this work, which is fabulous, and alternate months online, and I see that pattern continuing because I love it. I love working online, actually. I find it so intimate, and I love it. The interaction that happens is, I find, more intimate in a way than face to face, strangely. Maybe because of the layout of a group. You have a group that's quite spatially separated.
Yeah.
Whereas, online, everybody's face is close up. I don't know.
And is the one, because you mentioned on the call that you're doing one in Canada?
Oh, yes. So I used to teach every year face to face in Canada, in British Columbia, an island off Vancouver Island called Cortes Island, and it's Hollyhock. And up until COVID, I went there every year for like 30 odd years more. And then COVID closed the borders, and we weren't able to go in. And since then, I alternate. Rupert likes to have no fly years because he likes to set a good example for, not having people fly because it uses so much carbon, etc. Not that it makes a difference because the flights go anyway, but it's an example. So we go there every other year at the moment. And so we went there 2 years ago. After COVID, we went there back. And then, so yeah, this year I'll be there on the 25th of July till the 29th. Yeah,
Brilliant. So if anyone's in Canada or heading that way, that would be something to aim for.
Yes, and it's a beautiful place, and and I love working there. It's really fun. So that's in July, the end of July this year, 25th of July till the 29th. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you, and just to receive so many nuggets of wisdom and insight, and to have you here as a guest. It's been amazing. Thank you, Jill.
Yeah, pleasure.
So for those who want to check out Jill's website, we'll place the links into the comments, and check out this amazing work that Jill is doing, bringing through.
Join me, please. Yeah. Join me online or join me in person.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Tracy. That's a great pleasure to be with you in New Zealand.
Yes. Technology, isn't that amazing? Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank you for listening. Head over to Instagram and tell me what's resonated for you with this episode. You'll find me at tracy.cartwright. That's Tracy with no E. .cartwright. Or head over to my website, tracycartwright.co.nz, and receive a free audio with the gift from your ancestors. So until next time, be kind to yourself and have fun doing it.